ahead and let them get started. So Brandon on the right here is playing the 5-color Traverse the Ulvenwald Death Shadow deck. It's a pretty interesting deck. Ideally, you want to be on powering out Death Shadows and large Tarmogoyfs and just kind of applying pressure. You're almost a zoo deck with Traverse for some added card selection and just card advantage in general.
Using the very powerful Death Shadow, which I believe he has in his hand, and a couple Tarmogoyfs. Ryan is going to search up a Stomping Ground.
Now, he told us he's on a Rug Tempo deck.
He said it was Sea Stompy.
Sea Stompy.
Sea Stompy. I'm not entirely sure what he meant by that, but that
we'll find out.
Nam Nam Renegade.
Narnam.
I'm going to call it Nam Nam.
That is a 1/2 with Depth Touch with a Revolt trigger.
I believe he did have a Revolt trigger. So
he did indeed. So it comes in with an extra counter. So it's a 1 mana 2/3 with Death Touch. It's really relevant. Can be kind of aggressive, but at the same time also plays defense exceptionally well.
Brandon's already down to 14. Doing what his deck is supposed to be doing.
That is the power of the Death Shadow deck.
Now, Brandon has advocated that this is better than the Grixis list because he's able to play... Oh, he's fumbling his cards a little bit.
Ooh.
He's able to play both... it's more of a mixture between the Grixis list and the Jund list. It's probably closer to the Jund list than the Grixis list, but he's still able to play Stubborn Denial, which is a very powerful card in this deck.
The biggest thing I would say with the variants of Death Shadow, obviously when the Death Shadow deck became big originally after the banning of Gitaxian Probe, the big thing was just kind of just jamming it into a traditional Jund shell. And then that deck has since evolved, and now most of the time you see, obviously people in the Grixis Death Shadow, the more like kind of a Delver deck, really, where you're just kind of, you've got your, normally about 8 threats, you've got your 4 Death Shadows, and then 4 of some number of Gurmag Angler and Tassiger the Golden Fang. This deck plays a lot more like a kind of like a zoo toolbox deck, really, because you've got access to, obviously it is 5-color Death Shadow, so you do have access to cards from every shade, and you get access to some pretty powerful things for this archetype. For instance, Stubborn Denial, as Ethan already mentioned, basically being 1 mana negate for most of the creatures in your deck, and then Ranger of Eos and or Lingering Souls, which are really good for like the mirrors. Anything that wants to 1-for-1 removal you. Having access to all of those tools is really the draw of this 5-color deck. You kind of get to play a little bit of the tempo game, but at the same time, you have some pretty nutty aggro draws.
Now, I am wondering if Ryan doesn't think that Brandon might be on traditional Jund here, because he's getting pretty aggressive with that Narnam Renegade.
Yeah, he might not know that he's up against Death Shadow yet.
I'm surprised that he's being as aggressive, because he's going to make those he's just making those Death Shadows much bigger.
Now the real question is, how long does Brandon kind of keep the secret? Like, at some point he's going to play a card, or just play the Death Shadow itself that'll give away. Right now it looks like his hand is, I see 2 Tarmogoyfs and a Liliana of the Veil, so it's a very traditional Jund hand, and even the Abrupt Decay he just cast is very traditional Jund. If I
was Ryan, I would be thinking I'm just playing Jund right now, in all honesty.
Now obviously we don't know if they're like playtest partners, so he could know already, and then, but that does make the swinging with the Narnam Renegade looks a little less appealing if you know your opponent's on Death Shadow.
You're right, exactly.
Looks like he's trying to figure out what land to play for turn. Looks like I see
It looks like he has quite a few options.
Yeah, I do see a Steam Vents.
That
Also,
looks like
Steam Vents is the play. I believe he'll actually be down to 8.
Yes.
As soon as they correct the dice on the top of the screen there.
These players are being very loose with their life totals.
I'm gonna imagine that the paper record that Brandon is keeping is a little bit closer.
Now, what is that?
What indeed?
I'm going to go and check and see what he just played because I don't know what card that was.
4 mana, destroy all lands. That's modern legal? That is interesting. Still can't read that. This is an interesting card. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I'm not sure if that actually helps his case right now. That Tarmogoyf is getting really big, and all it takes is one fatal push, just anything really to clear that Narnum Renegade out of there, and then Brandon will just be off to the races.
Did you see it?
Couldn't read it.
That? Okay.
What card is that, Ethan?
Ryan just played Thoughts of Ruin, which is a card I have never seen played in any format ever. So it reads...
So what you're telling me is we should rename his deck to Spicy.
I guess. So what Thoughts of Ruin says, it's a 4-mana red, 2 red and 2 colorless. And it reads, each player sacrifices lands equal to the number of cards in your hand.
That is a very interesting card.
It is very interesting.
I'm not sure if it actually is turning out very well for Ryan, though. Because, Brandon came out of that with this Death Shadow, and Ryan kind of just sputtered out. I think that card is great on an empty board if you have something to rebuild from it immediately, or if you know your opponent doesn't have any resources. But in the state that they were in, the virtual parity that they were at the time, I just don't know if that's worth the risk. On the bright side for Ryan, he definitely knows what he's up against now.
But I think it might be a little too late. He needs to find a blocker now.
And a removal spell doesn't do it, because Brandon did show that he has a Stubborn Denial in hand to go with his 2 Tarmogoyfs and a Liliana and Lord knows what else. But that Stubborn Denial should do a pretty good job of keeping that Death Shadow safe and swinging. And that is Rug Tempo has had enough. It played its spice, and it went, and it said, okay, I'm done. We're good. On to the next. So we'll see what kind of things they bring in out of sideboard. The Traverse Shadow deck, sideboard can be wildly different depending on player preference.
Now, I believe he's probably going to be bringing in the Ranger of Eos and the Lingering Souls in this matchup. You typically want to bring... Ryan seems to be on more of a mid-rangey list, so that's... looks like he brought in a Disdainful Stroke, too.
Disdainful Stroke seems fine. At the very least, you could maybe use it to snipe the spice, as we could say. You also, based on what he saw out of Ryan, with his kind of like aggressive drops coupled with some counter magic, you might not know whether or not he's on any number of Cryptic Command. Disdainful Stroke's pretty good against Cryptic Command. So maybe he's thinking of trying to turn into kind of more of a tempo deck himself, more so than this toolbox deck. We'll really see how this game evolves going into game 2. I also imagine Ryan will bring in some kind of graveyard hate, because it certainly seems like Brandon makes much greater use out of his graveyard than Ryan.
I believe so. I don't really know what Ryan would be bringing in his colors against this deck. The issue that Rugg has always had in the past is not having the greatest sideboard options, especially when it comes to like graveyards or
You're
removal.
pretty much just like stuck on burn-based removal, which is not the greatest against Death Shadows and Tarmogoyfs. And then as far as graveyard hate goes, you're basically stuck on the artifact graveyard hate. You've got your obviously your Grafdigger's Cages and Relic of Progenitus are the two biggest ones. So it'll be interesting to see what he has and if he brings it in. Who knows? Maybe his sideboard plan is to go a little bit lower to the ground. If he brings in, maybe he's got like, probably not Wild Nacatl, but other 1 mana 2 to 3 power creatures. Maybe he runs some number of Delver. You never really know. There's a lot that he could be running that we have not seen. It's an interesting list, and it's something kind of new, or I guess could be something kind of old that he's bringing about. That he's kind of tweaked himself, but 5-color Shadow will do what Shadow does. We'll see if he keeps a reasonable hand with some lands and some spells and probably some discard, as the Death Shadow decks tend to have.
Looks like Ryan's taking a mulligan here.
Looks like Brandon is okay with his. I think I see 3 land.
I see a Stubborn Denial.
I think I see 3 land, Stubborn Denial. I think I saw a Mishra's Bauble as well.
Mishra's Bauble.
And maybe Inquisition of Kozilek?
Seems like a good hand, a starting hand. Not a lot of action going on, but a lot of ways to kind of set your hand up and mess up what your opponent's trying to do.
Yeah. Seems like a disruption-heavy hand, which disruption-heavy hands for the Death Shadow deck tend to be pretty good, because like you will find your threat eventually. It's just a matter of how aggressive do you need to be in the matchup. If he's thinking maybe, I can afford to be the control deck in this matchup, or I can afford to let him take the driver's seat and me just react, then a slower hand might not matter.
That is a noble hierarch.
This deck gets more and more interesting to me by the minute. So he has Narnam Renegade and Tarmogoyf, and I imagine some number of Lightning Bolt. So you would think he'd be maybe on this like Revolt Zoo type strategy, which we've seen a little bit of that deck in a just straight green red or a Naya shell. But he could have found something that makes the blue splash worth it other than Remand, which is, if I remember correctly, the only blue card we saw that game.
I saw a Mana Leak.
And he had a Mana Leak in hand. It's an interesting combination of things.
An Inquisition of Kozilek.
Also, I'm very interested that he is doing this now and not... Is that a
Molten Rain? And I believe that is that card that we saw last game. So yeah. I believe you probably take the Narnam Renegade here.
You either take the Narnam Renegade or you take the Molten Rain.
I believe
not taking the Molten Rain could be risky.
Well, you can't cast the Molten Rain here because it costs double red, I believe.
It does, but do you really want to be on please don't draw a red source?
I do.
When you are stuck on 1 land.
Maybe I'm wrong.
I thought Molten Rain cost double red. Or is that just Stone Rain?
Yeah, it costs double red.
Might want to get down there.
I'm going to get down there.
We will get that corrected, because that is incorrect. We'll wind this back a turn or two here. See if we can whoop. See if we can get this rewound correctly. since he cannot cast the Molten Rain. So get life totals corrected here. Get them to wind the turn back a little bit. See if maybe that changes the play at all. Because I imagine having the second land might change Brandon's turn at least a little bit. I guess not. I guess they're okay with moving forward as is, just minus the Molten Rain. There is a basic island. That is an interesting inclusion out of this 5-color deck. Normally they run basic swamp and basic forest, because those are the two basics that you want to be seeing. Obviously you want to be able to cast your discard cards and your Tarmogoyfs. But basic island, that's interesting. I guess he wants to be able to cast his Stubborn Denials through Blood Moon, which is kind of an interesting thought. I would think probably maybe out of the sideboard, if he thinks he was going to face up against a Blood Moon out of this deck. There you go. Get that Overgrown Tomb in there. Looked like for a second there he was thinking of going Godless Shrine untapped so that he could get a Lingering Souls going, but I think playing a Tarmogoyf is probably better on this board. Ooh, and there is that mana leak that Ethan was talking about earlier. But that is quickly met by a Stubborn Denial. That is the power of that card. There's just something about a Force Spike. And now that Tarmogoyf is out, it is 1 mana negate, and that is a very, very powerful Magic card. Especially in these Death Shadow decks that are so good at just bringing out cheap, powerful creatures. Just having 1 mana negate, being able to go Death Shadow, hold up 1 mana negate is just absurd.
I'm back. I had to take care of the drafters as well.
You missed the mana leak you mentioned earlier. Ryan tried to mana leak this Tarmogoyf that is going to town, and it was met by the Stubbornest of Denials. Good card, that Stubby D.
As a Lingering Souls, that is a very good Magic card.
That is probably the best card that this deck has access to as far as grinding goes. As much power as you can get out of tutoring for random traverse targets. Once you turn on Delirium, the real grind out of this deck is you just get Lingering Souls Liliana going, and then you're just playing good old Abzan. You just happen to have 1 mana negate in your Abzan deck. It's pretty good, I would say.
I'm wondering if Ryan's going to be casting this Molten Rain here, or if he's going to cast that other card that we saw last turn. But he also has a Snapcaster in his hand, I believe. Now, I think
does the land destruction do it right now?
I don't believe it does, and I think it's going to just get Stubborn Denied, or he's just going to let it happen. Okay.
I don't think he cares too much about the Overgrown Tomb at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
I think the board that Brandon has amassed is threatening enough that he doesn't necessarily care about that one specific land. I think the only land that he probably could have gone after that might have elicited the Stubborn Denial would be probably the Godless Shrine. I don't imagine he's running too many white sources. Normally these decks only run 1, maybe 2.
Mm-hmm.
So I imagine the Godless Shrine's probably the most important land that he has out at the moment. But, now that these Lingering Soul tokens are out of the way, I'm not sure he even cares about that Godless Shrine.
I'm not sure if he does either. Let's see what he plays here.
I will say if he plays the land sweep card, that will be Stubborn Denial,
yes.
in a heartbeat.
Well, actually, I don't even think it will be, because that would put Ryan much farther behind than it would Brandon.
fair. I think Brandon has just amassed too much board presence at this point. I don't know what kind of sweeper effects Ryan may be running. There is a Mishra's Bauble looking at the top of Ryan's deck.
Didn't get a good look at it.
We'll see. Seems to be okay with it.
It puts an artifact in the graveyard, so
that probably turns on Delirium as well.
It probably does. So that's an attack for 9.
And I
would assume Ryan would have to. This is just a Snapcaster blocker. It looks like. I believe he targeted.
Looks like he targeted Mana Leak. Maybe seeing if he can snag whatever the post-combat play is. Brandon forgot whose turn it was for a second there. I believe it's 4 to 9. Oof. Birds of Paradise is not what Ryan was looking for. Saves him a point of damage off of a Lingering Souls token, but if he doesn't have something, he is down to 1 here. It's beginning to look like this might be a tidy 2-0 for the Death Shadow deck.
It's looking like it. One piece of removal wins it for him, I believe.
Yeah. Any removal wins it, and untapping for his following turn probably wins it at this point. I'm just not sure what Ryan can pull out, unless he is sandbagging and Izzet Staticaster in his hand, which we know he's not. So
he'll be taking 3 here, puts him down to 1.
Do you even play any of that? No, playing a Death Shadow.
Just extending that board.
And Ryan did not look particularly excited about that. Kind of just there is the
GGs. Hand. All right.
Shadow with a tidy 2-0 of the Rug Tempo deck. Still not really sure what Ryan was trying to do there.
Sure either.
It just seems like he was trying to do some interesting things, but I just don't know if the deck he's trying to play is well positioned in Modern.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to go down and look and see if we can find another game we can put on stream for you guys. We have about 20. I'm sure we could probably
hopefully we can find at least one more.
When I was down there,
this is Modern.
Yeah.
The games do tend to go pretty quick, and we'll see if we're not the first ones done this time compared to the last ones, the last couple rounds.
And we will be right back.